Right, this foreign relations bill today to reassert the Commonwealth's primacy over our nation's foreign affairs, and an extraordinary speech yesterday from China's Deputy Ambassador to Australia that's still reverberating around the corridors in Canberra, and the ongoing hoopla and campaigning from the Republican convention today as well. Who better to analyse all of that mixed bag? The Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan. Greg joins me from Melbourne now. Greg, I've got to start with this announcement in Canberra today. There's a list of 42 agreements, we're told, that will come under review. 27 of them relate to China. Now, given Labor have signalled they'll likely support this legislation, we obviously need the Foreign Minister to do her audit as well. Do you think we'll see this Victorian Belt and Road deal torn up?
Peter, it's fabulous to be with you. I think we will. Andrew's comments at the press conference today were ridiculous. I mean, the bloke needs a holiday. He's just talking sort of fantasy madness. He says the Prime Minister has to replace the markets that Victoria will lose. But the truth is, under the Victorian Belt Road Initiative, not one single dollar for any particular deal has been committed. So he will lose precisely nothing. Part of the absurdity of the Andrews position was that he had given Beijing a geostrategic win by campaigning against his own nation's foreign policy, and in exchange, he got nothing. So the financial loss to Victoria is zero, but the Belt Road Initiative is against national foreign policy. It also doesn't mean that future agreements won't be done. It just means that they'll need to be cleared with Canberra as being in the national interest. So I thought Andrew's comments today were the most bizarre I've seen from a state premier for a long time. And it'd be a good thing if this deal is torn up. I don't think the deal in substance was all that dangerous, but it was a very bad thing to give Beijing a geopolitical win. Beijing wasn't going to give Andrews a single dollar, which he wasn't going to get anyway. That's not the way they operate.
Yeah, I think, though, it was a precedent that the Prime Minister couldn't really let stand, particularly as these, states start to flex their muscle. I think one of the good things out of this COVID crisis is Australians are seeing actually how powerful in constitutional terms their states are, and hopefully they'll pay a bit more attention in state elections, because, the issues that the states have on their table to adjudicate are the ones that really most impact our daily lives. All the Canberra issues are on a different scale, but, this and Belt and Road and COVID and everything shows you how powerful Daniel Andrews is. What did you make of that speech yesterday? Quite extraordinary, not just the speech, obviously, but I think, more importantly, the Q&A session. It was an extraordinary contribution. Let's have a listen.
We should respect each other's choice of social and political system and mode of development, and refrain from imposing one's own idea onto the other.
Deputy Head of the Chinese Mission, I don't know how you pronounce it, irony or hypocrisy in Mandarin there, Greg. What did you make of it?
Well, look, in principle, it's a good thing for senior Chinese diplomats to talk to the press club and to take unscripted questions from journalists. They never do that at home. They seldom do it abroad. But he showed the utter absurdity of Communist Party ideology. The speech itself was okay. It had a narrative which skated around inconvenient facts, but the journalists asked a lot of inconvenient fact questions, and in answer to them, he just had to argue, as communists always do, that black was white and up was down. So he was asked how come Chinese ministers won't return the phone calls of their Australian counterparts. And he said, it's very busy with COVID and I'm not aware of any unreturned phone calls. So he must be the only person in Australia who hasn't heard that Simon Birmingham has been trying to get the Chinese trade minister on the phone all these months. Then he claimed China would never try to interfere in Australian politics. So all of those donations by sources linked to the Chinese Communist Party, to Australian political parties, all of the assessments by every single Western intelligence agency in the world about Chinese cyber attacks on Australian political parties and other Western political parties and key infrastructure. Then he says that Australia is interfering in China's internal affairs because we talk about the human rights of Hong Kong people. But these are guaranteed by the Chinese government in an international treaty. And then he uses this sort of ridiculous slogan that we've hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. what he means is Australia has been subject to a campaign of propaganda denigration by the Chinese government. And he's a sophisticated man, obviously, but he sounded in the Q&A session very reminiscent to me of a Soviet diplomat from the Cold War days in the 50s and 60s who just had to look at you and say, you know, there are no Soviet troops in Prague, this kind of thing. It was an illustration of how grotesque Chinese communist propaganda is. And yet, of course, it had its faithful band of followers in the China lobby in Australia who are at least as faithful to the Chinese Communist Party line as their diplomats.
Absolutely right. And he refused to deny that the Thousand Talents program, of course, in the universities is espionage. And you're right, he had no real answer for the lack of minister-to-minister discussions, communications at the very least between our mob and the Chinese. Let's go to the United States. We're into the third day of the Republican convention. I'm sure, like me, you're watching a lot of it at night and watching it again during the day. Mike Pence, the Vice President, accepted the nomination today. He stepped up a lot of the campaign rhetoric. He really stepped up the attack on Joe Biden. Let's have a listen.
Joe Biden said that we were living through a season of darkness. But as President Trump said, where Joe Biden sees American darkness, we see American greatness.
Now, I'm going to pull you in on the content, but I have to say, someone who's, worked on campaigns, the production values, I mean, the Democrats like to claim, they've got Hollywood in their pocket. The production values between the two conventions, the Democrats last week and the Republicans this week, are light years different. I mean, the Republicans, it's such a slick operation. And interestingly, forget the two-bit TV sort of celebrities, they've got the high-profile Republicans, but they've got a lot of ordinary Americans with pretty extraordinary stories. This is a really, this is a deliberate play into the Trump heartland, isn't it?
Well, it is, Peter. I think I was very critical of the Democratic convention last week, not just because I disagreed with some of the things they were saying, but it was a non-rational, it was a post-rational production. It was all emotion, all video clips. Nobody even got to string a whole paragraph together. You'd get a video of one person saying one sentence and then in the next sentence would be said by somebody else. And it was all about emotion. It was not a rational production at all. Had almost no reference to policy, and it was all schmaltz about Biden's personality. The Republican convention, on the other hand, it's been very slick, but in a way it's been a conventional, rational Western political convention. There have been a lot of speeches. People have made coherent cases. Ordinary people, a mother of a Down syndrome baby who didn't like being told that she should have had her baby aborted, ordinary folks who've served in the military or run small businesses, and also senior politicians, Democrat and Republican. Magnificent black attorney general from Kentucky says to Joe Biden, you say if you don't know whether you're going to vote for Trump or me, you're not really black. Well, listen to me, Mr. Vice President. I'm black. I'm not in chains. You don't get to tell me how I vote on the basis of the colour of my skin. Very powerful stuff. But I thought Pence's speech was by far the best speech of either convention. And I, as a moderate conservative, I wish that Pence was at the top of this ticket and not Trump. There are real character issues around Trump. There are no character issues around Pence. Pence made the most sophisticated defence of the Trump record you could make. Mm-hmm. He engaged on the issue of the management of coronavirus. Republicans need to engage on that. And then he made a devastating case against Biden, which was not personal and not nasty. It was based on Biden's record, on Biden's rhetoric, and on Biden's policies. And he had killer lines, like on the law and order issue, which is a great winner for the Republicans. He said to the American people, you won't be safe under a Joe Biden presidency. That's a very powerful line. To me, that is much more powerful than the sort of thing that Trump does, which is say, oh, nasty Joe or sleepy Joe or something. Now, no doubt that's because I'm very old-fashioned. I prefer rational argument to abuse. But I thought Pence's speech today gives you some hope for the quality of American political culture.
Yeah, I'm with you on inverting the ticket. I thought there was a dignity of Pence, a respect for the office with Pence, a fabulous backstory about his own family, the number of, children and their spouses in his family in the military. I just think he looked like a grown-up. I think he put America back with some sort of international standing there today, and well, we'll see what comes of the president's contribution tomorrow.